Victoria Sinclair sat at her polished mahogany desk, her fingers gliding over the edge of her phone as her mind raced through the many decisions that awaited her. Outside her office, the world moved in a blur, with employees working tirelessly to uphold the success she had meticulously built over the years. Her empire, a sprawling network of businesses ranging from real estate to tech, was a fortress she had constructed brick by brick. She had done it on her own, with no one to help her but herself. And that, perhaps more than anything else, was the root of her isolation. She had spent years climbing to the top, and in the process, she had learned that there was only room at the summit for one. The mansion that Victoria called home was a reflection of her success. It stood tall on a hill, its sleek glass windows reflecting the grandeur of her life. Inside, everything was pristine, meticulously curated, down to the last piece of art on the wall. Yet for all its beauty and luxury, there was a coldness to it, a sense of emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. The vast hallways, the soaring ceilings, the silent, expansive rooms, all of them seemed to echo her loneliness. Victoria had always been a solitary figure, not out of choice, but necessity. People, she had learned early on, were unpredictable, fragile, and far too capable of betraying trust. Her childhood had taught her that lesson well. As a young girl, she had dreams of love, of friendship, of connection. She had wanted to believe in the goodness of the world, to trust that those around her would have her back. But life had other plans. Her father had been a distant, business-obsessed man, more interested in his financial empire than in his family. Her mother, a fragile and passive woman, had never stood up to him. Victoria had spent her early years in the shadow of neglect, craving affection that never came, longing for validation that was never given. By the time she was a teenager, she had learned to fend for herself, to build emotional walls as high as the ones around her family home. She told herself that she didn't need anyone. She didn't need love, didn't need connection. She would be successful on her own, and that would be enough. As she entered adulthood, Victoria's sharp intellect and unrelenting drive propelled her forward. She built a business empire from the ground up, turning a modest inheritance into something monumental. Her success was undeniable, respected, feared, admired. But those who worked with her saw only the surface. They didn't know the price she had paid for her power. Victoria had sacrificed love, friendship, and even family to get where she was. She had kept people at arm's length, ensuring no one could ever truly get close to her. She had learned to trust no one, and in turn, no one had ever earned the right to truly care for her. At work, Victoria was known for her no-nonsense approach. She made decisions with the precision of a surgeon, cutting away anything that didn't serve her goals. Her employees respected her, but no one dared to get too familiar. She had earned a reputation for being cold, distant, and ruthless. It was a persona that worked well for her, it kept people at a distance, just the way she liked it. But inside, she felt the absence of human connection, the hollow ache of loneliness that she had grown so accustomed to hiding. Her family relationships were equally strained. Her mother, now frail and elderly, occasionally called, but their conversations were always short, perfunctory. Victoria's relationship with her father had long been non-existent. He had passed away years ago, leaving her with nothing but a legacy of expectations and emotional abandonment. She had no real friends to speak of, only acquaintances, business partners, and people who saw her as an asset rather than a person. Victoria's life was a fortress, and she was its solitary queen. But all that changed in an instant. A scandal erupted in the public eye, one that threatened to unravel everything she had worked for. One of her closest associates, a man she had once trusted implicitly, was implicated in a major financial fraud scheme. The news broke like a bombshell, sending shockwaves through the media and tarnishing the reputation of everyone connected to the scandal. Victoria had always prided herself on maintaining a spotless public image, but now, everything was at risk. Her PR team scrambled to control the narrative, issuing statements, arranging meetings, and handling the fallout. But no matter what they did, the damage was done. The media vultures circled, and Victoria could feel the weight of public scrutiny pressing in on her. She was no stranger to pressure, but this felt different. The storm was relentless, and as it intensified, she found herself retreating further into her shell, her emotions becoming increasingly inaccessible. The walls she had so carefully constructed over the years grew taller, thicker, and harder to breach. It was at this low point, when the world seemed determined to break her, that something unexpected happened. Victoria had been invited to a high-profile gala, an event attended by influential figures from every corner of the business and political world. It was meant to be a night of networking, of putting on a brave face for the sake of her reputation. But as she arrived at the venue, feeling the weight of every eye on her, Victoria's composure faltered for the first time in years. As she made her way into the grand ballroom, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the entrance. A murmur rippled through the guests as they saw her approach, some with sympathetic glances, others with judgmental stares. The whispers were hard to ignore. The scandal was on everyone's mind, and Victoria could feel the judgment in the air like a thick fog. But then something incredible happened. Her daughter, Emma, who had been quietly standing by her side, suddenly stepped forward. The room fell silent as the young girl, no more than 12, stood in front of her mother, facing the crowd with an unexpected calmness. Emma was small, but there was a strength in her posture, a fierce protectiveness in her eyes. "My mother is not what you think," Emma said, her voice carrying through the room, steady and clear. "You don't know the full story, and you don't know her like I do. She's more than this scandal. She's everything to me, and I won't let anyone tear her down." The words echoed in the cavernous room, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Everyone, every influential figure, every reporter, every curious onlooker was stunned. Emma had just done what no one else had been able to do, she had defended Victoria. In front of all of them, in front of the people who had judged her, criticized her, and gossiped about her, Emma had shown a loyalty that Victoria had never known she could inspire. In that moment, something inside Victoria shifted. It wasn't an immediate change, but it was a crack in the armor she had so carefully built. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as the cold, calculating businesswoman, not as the persona the world had created for her, but as a mother, as a person, someone who truly cared. Emma had given her a glimpse of something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for in years: connection. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than power and control. Victoria sat alone in her spacious office, the glow of the city lights outside casting long shadows across the room. She stared at the pile of papers before her, but her mind was miles away, replaying the scene from the gala. The words Emma had spoken to the crowd had echoed in her mind ever since. Her daughter, who should have been lost in the excitement of a night out, had stepped forward and publicly defended her mother with a clarity and conviction that surprised everyone, including Victoria herself. Victoria had always known Emma to be mature for her age, but this was something else entirely. Her daughter had stood up, not just as a child, but as a voice of reason in the midst of a storm, displaying more empathy and understanding than Victoria had thought her capable of. The crowd's murmur had quieted when Emma spoke, her words offering a rare glimpse of humanity in the sea of superficial conversations that surrounded them. Emma had defended Victoria against the backlash, speaking with an almost adult-like sensibility about the pressures her mother faced, the sacrifices she made, and the responsibilities she bore. It wasn't what Victoria had expected, but it was exactly what she needed in that moment. Yet, the relief she had initially felt was short-lived. Instead of gratitude, the words Emma had spoken had planted a seed of discomfort in Victoria's chest. Her daughter, a child barely in her teens, understood her better than she understood herself. That realization struck deep, and it left Victoria unsettled, questioning the very foundation of their relationship. Emma had seen through the polished exterior Victoria had worked so hard to construct through the professional veneer of the successful businesswoman who never showed weakness and into the cracks that she had long tried to hide. Victoria had spent years building her career, climbing the ladder, fighting to be seen and heard in a world that often dismissed her. But in doing so, she had neglected the one relationship that should have been at the center of her life. She had been so focused on the demands of work, the pressure to be the best, the constant need to maintain control, that she had left Emma behind in the shadows. Now, Emma had spoken up, not only for Victoria's defense but for the defense of their bond, something that Victoria had taken for granted. As Victoria leaned back in her chair, the weight of it all pressed down on her. She was still reeling from the public fallout of the gala, but the emotional aftermath was even harder to navigate. There had been the usual criticisms, of course, the whispers of her being too cold, too ambitious, too detached, but it was Emma's words, spoken with such care and clarity, that felt like the true challenge. They had forced Victoria to confront the parts of herself she had kept buried for so long. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, not since the painful betrayals of her past, and yet now, her daughter was the one asking her to see the emotional distance that had grown between them. Victoria had always believed that she was doing the right thing by focusing on her career. She had believed that providing for Emma, giving her everything she wanted and more, would make up for the time she couldn't spend with her, the moments she had missed. But now, as she thought about Emma's unspoken plea, she realized the truth: no amount of material wealth could replace the emotional connection they had lost. Victoria had provided for Emma in every way that mattered on the surface, but had she really been there for her? Had she given her the emotional support, the love, the guidance that every child needed from a parent? As the reality of her neglect settled in, Victoria found herself torn. She loved Emma deeply, there was no question about that, but she also feared what would happen if she allowed herself to open up emotionally. She had built up so many walls over the years, erected so many defenses against the world's harshness, that the idea of letting someone, even her own daughter, see the cracks terrified her. The vulnerability that Emma had shown so effortlessly was something Victoria could hardly comprehend. How could she, who had always been so strong and controlled, lower her guard now? She had been hurt too many times before by people she trusted, by the very system she had fought to thrive within, and she couldn't bear to face that kind of pain again. But Emma had made it clear that there was a disconnect between them, one that couldn't be ignored any longer. In her unexpected display of wisdom, Emma had reminded Victoria that while success in the business world was important, it wasn't the only thing that mattered. Relationships, love, understanding, these were the things that gave life meaning. Victoria had spent so much time perfecting the outward appearance of her life that she had neglected the inner part, the part that truly made her who she was. Despite the emotional turmoil, Victoria also realized something else: her daughter was the one person who could see through the facade. She was the only one who knew, perhaps even better than Victoria herself, who Victoria truly was beneath the polished exterior. And that truth was both terrifying and freeing. In a way, Emma was the one who had truly seen Victoria not as a businesswoman, a successful figure in society, but as a woman who had struggled, who had been hurt, who was doing her best to protect her family in the only way she knew how. Victoria's internal struggle became clear as she navigated the growing crisis. She wanted to protect Emma, to shield her from the world's judgment, to make up for the times she had fallen short as a mother. But how could she protect her daughter when she was so unsure of how to protect herself? How could she show Emma the love and emotional support she needed when Victoria had never learned how to express her own emotions? The thought of opening up, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, felt like an insurmountable task. And yet, the pressure to do so mounted with each passing day. The public image Victoria had so carefully crafted was beginning to unravel, and with it, so was the image of the perfect mother she had always tried to project. Emma's defense of her had stripped away the final layer of the facade, leaving Victoria exposed in a way she never thought possible. But in that exposure, there was an opportunity for healing, for growth, for understanding. If Victoria could somehow overcome her fear and allow herself to be more present, more emotionally available for Emma, perhaps they could rebuild the bond that had been strained by years of neglect. As she sat there, her thoughts racing, Victoria knew she could no longer keep running from the emotional truth. She couldn't protect Emma by continuing to hide behind her career, behind the walls she had built. If she truly wanted to be the mother her daughter needed, she had to confront the vulnerability she had long avoided. It was time for Victoria to stop pretending, to stop being the strong, stoic businesswoman all the time, and to start being the mother who could be seen, who could be understood, who could finally see and understand her daughter in return. The scandal that had once been a whisper in the media now raged like wildfire, its flames consuming everything in its path. Victoria had never anticipated that a simple misstep would spiral into such an overwhelming storm. What had started as a rumor about her personal life quickly became a full-blown media frenzy, with the press devouring every piece of her private world. They were no longer focused on her business acumen or her wealth. Instead, they questioned her suitability as a role model, dissecting her every action and every word, as if under a microscope. Her every move, once considered calculated and impressive, now seemed suspect, tainted by the growing sense of vulnerability that surrounded her. The press relentlessly highlighted the emotional distance between her and Emma, her daughter, turning their fractured relationship into a spectacle for the world to consume. The pictures of them together, once symbols of success and elegance, now appeared in tabloids, accompanied by insinuations and critiques. The cold heart of Victoria Dempsey, how her emotional distance is destroying her family, one headline read. Another suggested, Emma Dempsey, a young girl lost in the shadow of a corporate titan. The more the media pried into her personal life, the more the public turned on her. Victoria, who had once commanded admiration and respect for her achievements, was now seen as out of touch, even by those who had once idolized her. The narrative was slipping away from her grasp, and with it, so was her image. The media portrayed her as an absent mother, a woman too consumed by her career to nurture the most important relationship in her life. The public's perception soured quickly. The very qualities that had once made Victoria a symbol of power were now being used against her. Her wealth, once a solid foundation, seemed less valuable in the face of this growing crisis. The luxury cars, the mansions, the designer clothes, none of it could protect her from the damage that was being done to her reputation. More than that, they seemed like hollow symbols of a life that lacked depth, a life that was falling apart. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more it slipped through her fingers. Her closest business allies, the ones who had once admired her drive and ambition, began to distance themselves. They saw her vulnerabilities now, the cracks that were beginning to form in her carefully constructed empire. Some were whispering about selling their shares in her company, unsure if she could weather the storm. Others were quietly looking for new opportunities, sensing that her fall from grace might drag them down as well. Her empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now under threat not just from external competitors but from within. The very people she had trusted for years were pulling away, and Victoria knew it. As the days went by, she found herself more isolated than ever. Her assistant, once a loyal confidant, now seemed to be walking on eggshells around her. The phone calls from potential investors grew colder, the meetings less frequent. People no longer saw Victoria as the powerhouse they once did. They saw her as a woman on the edge, and they were not willing to risk their own stability for someone whose future seemed uncertain. Meanwhile, Emma's behavior became more troubling. The child who had once been her pride and joy, the girl who had been a symbol of the perfect family life, was now withdrawing. She stopped attending the events Victoria arranged, no longer showed up for family dinners, and became more and more distant with each passing day. At first, Victoria tried to chalk it up to the stress of the scandal, but deep down, she knew the truth. Emma wasn't just reacting to the media or the gossip, she was reacting to Victoria herself. Victoria had always been a woman who lived in control, but that control had always been focused outward on her business, on her empire, on her image. She had never learned how to nurture the relationships that mattered most. Now, as Emma began to pull away, Victoria realized the painful truth: she had been so consumed by her need to succeed, to prove herself, that she had neglected the most important relationship of all. Emma was no longer the little girl who admired her mother, she was a young woman who saw her mother's flaws, who felt the emptiness that Victoria had left in her wake. Victoria tried to reconnect with her, but each attempt was met with resistance. Emma would avoid her gaze, give short answers, and spend more and more time locked away in her room. Victoria knew this wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was the manifestation of a deeper wound. Emma was hurt, and Victoria had no idea how to heal it. For all her success in the business world, she had no idea how to fix what was broken inside her family. The pressure of the media scandal, combined with her strained relationship with Emma, seemed to converge in a way that felt almost unbearable. Just as she began to feel like there was no way out of the downward spiral, a new challenge arose, one that hit her where it hurt the most: her business. Victoria's company, once a titan in the industry, was now under threat of a hostile takeover. The very empire she had built, the legacy she had worked so hard to create, was on the verge of crumbling. This wasn't just an ordinary challenge, it was an existential threat. If she couldn't fight back, if she couldn't maintain control of her company, everything she had worked for would be lost. The pressure was now twofold: she had to protect her empire from external forces while simultaneously confronting the internal conflict that had been brewing for years. Her fear of intimacy and love, the very things that had kept her emotionally distant from Emma and others, was now threatening to destroy everything she had built. Her need for control, her obsession with success, had blinded her to the importance of vulnerability, of connection. Now, she was being forced to face the consequences of her choices. At a crossroads, Victoria found herself torn between two worlds. On one hand, she could fight tooth and nail to regain control of her business. She could do what she had always done: focus on the external, the tangible, the measurable. But deep down, she knew that this path, if pursued alone, would leave her even more isolated. The business world was changing, and she was beginning to understand that the things that had brought her to the top might not be enough to keep her there. On the other hand, she could attempt to mend her fractured relationship with Emma, to take the time to heal the wounds that had formed between them. But that required something she had never been willing to give: vulnerability. It required facing the uncomfortable truth that her empire, for all its power, could not replace the love and connection that she had neglected for so long. But could she let go of her fear of intimacy long enough to make that choice? The tension reached a breaking point as Victoria realized that both her empire and her relationship with Emma were in jeopardy. This was no longer just about business or reputation. It was about who she was, who she wanted to be, and what kind of legacy she truly wanted to leave behind. She had always been the woman who controlled the narrative, but now, for the first time, she had to confront the narrative that was being written for her. The stakes had never been higher. Victoria sat at her desk, the weight of the empire she had built pressing down on her like an invisible force. Her company, once the center of her life, seemed meaningless now. The wealth, the power, the prestige, they all felt hollow, as though they were empty vessels that could no longer fill the void inside her. Her mind kept returning to the same thought, the one that had been quietly haunting her for weeks: she had lost her daughter. For so many years, Victoria had thrown herself into her work with relentless determination. She had built her company from the ground up, fought tooth and nail for every success, and climbed higher than most could ever dream. Yet in the process, she had neglected the one thing that truly mattered: the people she loved. Emma, her daughter, had grown up in the shadow of Victoria's ambition, always playing second fiddle to the demands of the business. For all of Victoria's accomplishments, she had missed the most crucial aspect of life: her family. In the stillness of that moment, with the hum of the city outside and the silence of the office around her, a wave of clarity washed over Victoria. All of her accomplishments, everything she had worked for, seemed to evaporate in an instant. They meant nothing. They had brought her no joy, no fulfillment. What good was all of it if she lost the person she cared for most in the world? A wave of guilt flooded her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than the cold, controlled professionalism that had defined her for so long. Her daughter had needed her, and she had been absent. All the late nights at the office, the weekends spent on business trips, the countless sacrifices made for the sake of her company, none of it had mattered. Emma had grown up without her, and Victoria had been too blind to see it until it was almost too late. In that moment of clarity, Victoria knew what she had to do. She had to let go. She had to step away from the company, something she never thought possible. It wasn't easy to admit to herself, and even harder to actually do. Her company had been her life, her identity. But now, she saw it for what it truly was: a distraction, a shield that had kept her from facing the pain of her broken relationship with Emma. The thought of stepping away from the company sent a rush of panic through her. But at the same time, there was a quiet relief. The world she had created felt like a prison, and she could see the bars more clearly than ever. Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself: she was going to put her family first. She would give up her place in the corporate world, at least for now. The business could survive without her, Emma needed her more. It was a terrifying thought, but it was the only path that felt right. She picked up the phone and dialed her daughter's number. She hadn't spoken to Emma in weeks, and their last conversation had ended in anger and tears. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she had to try. "Emma, it's me. Can we talk?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Emma's voice came through, strained and distant. I don't think I have anything to say to you, Emma replied, her words sharp and raw. The hurt in her voice was unmistakable, and it stung Victoria like a physical blow. Please, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I need to see you. I'm sorry, I know I've failed you. But I'm trying to change. Please, let me make things right. There was another pause, and then Emma spoke again, her voice trembling with emotion. You always say that, Mom. You always say you're going to change, that things are going to be different. But they never are. You've never been there for me. All these years, you've been so busy with your company, and I've always been second to that. I had to grow up so fast because you weren't there. You were always too focused on your business to notice how much I needed you. Victoria's heart shattered at her daughter's words. She had known on some level that Emma felt abandoned, but hearing it so plainly, so painfully, was a crushing blow. She had built her empire, her wealth, her success, and in doing so, she had neglected the most important relationship in her life. The realization that she had failed Emma so completely was devastating. I didn't realize, Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I was doing it all for you. I thought if I succeeded, we could have everything. But I see now. I see now that I was wrong. Emma was silent for a moment, and Victoria held her breath, praying that her daughter would hear her sincerity. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice quieter but still filled with pain. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom. I don't know if I even want to try anymore. The words hit Victoria like a punch to the gut, but she didn't argue. She had no defense, no justification. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. All she could do was listen, and let Emma say the things she had been holding inside for so long. I'm sorry, Emma, Victoria said, her voice full of regret. I can't change the past, but I want to try. I want to be the mother you needed me to be. Please, let me show you. Let me make it right. There was no immediate response. Emma's silence was both a rejection and a cry for the love she had been denied. The conversation ended with no resolution, no promises. But for Victoria, it was the beginning of a painful and humbling journey. As she hung up the phone, the weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. She had just faced the truth: her emotional detachment, her years of prioritizing success over family, had come at a high cost. It was a cost she had never fully understood until now. Her daughter was the person who mattered most, and she had taken her for granted. Victoria knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. She didn't expect Emma to forgive her right away, or even to accept her attempts at reconciliation. The damage had been done, and it would take time, perhaps even years, to rebuild what had been lost. But for the first time in a long time, Victoria was ready to face the pain, the regret, and the uncertainty. She was ready to embark on a journey of self-reflection and healing, not just for Emma, but for herself. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew that it was the only path forward. And for the first time in her life, she was willing to take it. Victoria's decision to prioritize her family over her business, a choice that had once felt like a decisive and necessary shift, now seems to unravel before her very eyes. The world that she had spent years building, brick by meticulous brick, begins to tremble, as if the foundation she relied on is crumbling beneath her. The media, always hungry for the next big story, seizes the moment with relentless scrutiny. Headlines proclaim her as a failure, a businesswoman who couldn't balance her empire with her personal life. The questions, the doubts, they flood in from every direction, each one chipping away at her confidence. Her competitors, who had always viewed her as a powerful force, now sense an opportunity. They move swiftly, capitalizing on her perceived vulnerability. They flood the market with aggressive marketing campaigns, undercutting her prices and positioning themselves as the new, reliable players in the industry. In boardrooms and executive meetings, whispers of Victoria's faltering empire spread like wildfire, and she can almost hear the smirk in the voices of those who once admired her. For the first time in years, she feels like an outsider in her own industry, powerless to stop the storm she inadvertently unleashed. Her employees, many of whom had once trusted her unwavering leadership, now look to her with a mix of uncertainty and fear. Some are quietly searching for new opportunities, others are just waiting to see what happens next. The atmosphere at the office has shifted from one of ambition and loyalty to one of doubt and caution. Victoria tries to reassure them, but the words seem hollow, as if the trust that had once bound them together has been broken. She can't help but feel the weight of their eyes on her, their skepticism gnawing at her already fragile sense of self. Victoria begins to question whether she made the right choice, wondering if sacrificing her business was truly the path to redemption. She had always believed that her professional success would bring her happiness and that of her family, but now the decision to put her personal life first feels like a reckless gamble. The balance she had once maintained so carefully between work and home now seems impossible to reclaim. As her financial empire begins to falter, she watches helplessly as the fruits of her labor slip through her fingers. Every day brings new losses, contracts falling through, clients pulling away, her stock price dipping lower and lower. Each setback seems to confirm her worst fears, that by choosing her family, she has lost everything she worked so hard for. At home, the atmosphere is no better. Emma, her daughter, remains distant, her coldness almost palpable. Despite Victoria's repeated attempts to bridge the growing divide, Emma remains locked in her own world of hurt and anger. Victoria's heartfelt apologies, her gestures of reconciliation, fall flat. Emma's rejection is both painful and incomprehensible to Victoria. She cannot understand why her daughter cannot see that she is trying, that she has made this difficult decision for their family's future. Yet Emma's walls remain high, and the emotional chasm between them widens with each passing day. Victoria watches as Emma pulls further and further away. Once a loving, attentive daughter, Emma is now someone she barely recognizes, a person who seems to want nothing to do with her. The isolation stings. Victoria had built her life around the idea that success in business would eventually lead to a stronger, more secure family life. But now, with her daughter rejecting her at every turn, the reality feels devastating. She wants so badly to reach Emma, to fix what's been broken, but the more she tries, the more she feels as if she's pushing her daughter further into the abyss of resentment. The internal struggle that has simmered beneath the surface for so long grows louder. Victoria finds herself questioning everything she thought she knew about love, success, and family. She thought that by being a powerful, successful woman, she could set an example for Emma, that her drive and ambition would inspire her daughter to achieve greatness. Instead, it feels as if she has lost everything that truly mattered. Her business empire, once a source of pride, now feels hollow and meaningless in the face of her fractured relationship with Emma. Victoria's breakdown is gradual, but unmistakable. The emotional toll of her decisions takes its toll on her body and mind. Sleepless nights, endless days filled with unanswered questions, and an overwhelming sense of guilt drag her further into despair. She doesn't know how to fix what's been broken. She doesn't even know if it's possible. Every time she looks at Emma, she sees not just her daughter, but a reflection of her own failure, a reminder of everything she has lost. She wonders if she is even worthy of the love and affection Emma once gave her. Can she truly rebuild their bond, or is it too late? The fear of losing her daughter forever looms over her like a dark cloud. Each day without Emma's forgiveness feels like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. Victoria knows she can't change the past, but she is consumed with the hope that there is still time to make things right. But even as she clings to that hope, doubt creeps in. What if Emma never forgives her? What if the emotional wounds she has inflicted are too deep to heal? What if the damage done is permanent? Victoria is caught between two worlds. On one side, there's her business, the empire she has built from the ground up, which is slowly slipping from her grasp. On the other, there's her family, the love she once took for granted, now slipping away as well. She finds herself standing at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take. Should she continue fighting to restore the business, to reclaim the power and status she once held, or should she focus entirely on trying to rebuild the relationship with Emma, even if it means letting go of the career that defined her? The stakes are at their highest, and Victoria knows that whatever choice she makes will shape the rest of her life. The fear of losing Emma completely threatens to consume her, but so does the fear of giving up everything she has worked for. In the silence of her own thoughts, she faces the impossible question: can she truly have both, or will she have to choose between the love of her daughter and the empire she built? Her emotional breakdown becomes a battleground, and Victoria must confront the deepest fears of all those that have been with her from the start. The fear that no matter how hard she tries, she will always fall short. The fear that her choices, no matter how well intentioned, will never be enough. The fear that she may have lost Emma for good, and with her, any hope of redemption. Victoria's battle with herself reaches a critical juncture, as the external world continues to change around her, but she knows that the most challenging part of her journey is the one she must face alone. The world has shifted, her career, her reputation, and even her relationships have all been impacted by the whirlwind of events that have unfolded. But the battle now is not against external forces. It is against herself. The cracks in her emotional armor, the scars from years of unresolved pain, have surfaced, and they are more apparent than ever. Her childhood abandonment issues have always been a silent companion, lurking in the background, influencing her choices, her behavior, and her relationships. These deep wounds have shaped her sense of self-worth and the way she interacts with others. The fear of being abandoned again, of being left behind by those she loves, has led her to constantly push people away, even as she yearns for connection. Her obsession with success and achievement, once a driving force, has now begun to feel like a cage. Victoria has spent so much of her life chasing external validation, always striving to be the best, to prove to herself and others that she is enough, but the cost has been high. The pursuit of success has come at the expense of her emotional well-being, and she's beginning to realize that no amount of accolades or accomplishments will heal the void inside her. Victoria's inability to trust people, whether friends, family, or colleagues, has been another barrier she's never truly addressed. Trust has always been a fragile thing for her, easily broken and hard to rebuild. She's been hurt before, and each wound has only reinforced her belief that people are unreliable, that love is conditional, and that relying on others is a weakness. As much as she craves connection, her fears of vulnerability have kept her at arm's length from those who could truly help her heal. Faced with the magnitude of these unresolved issues, Victoria takes a pivotal step: she begins therapy. The decision is not easy for her. Admitting that she needs help feels like a defeat, a vulnerability she has long resisted. But it is also a moment of courage, a moment when she chooses to face her deepest fears. In therapy, she confronts the emotions she has spent years burying: the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, and the terror of opening herself up to others. She learns that these fears have shaped much of her behavior, her perfectionism, her drive for success, and her inability to trust. For the first time in years, Victoria allows herself to feel the pain she's been avoiding. She allows herself to grieve the abandonment she experienced as a child, the times when she felt unloved and unwanted. She confronts the emotional distance she's kept from her own heart, and she begins to understand how her defense mechanisms have sabotaged her ability to form genuine, lasting connections. The work is difficult, painful, and often uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. Slowly, Victoria starts to unravel the layers of fear and shame she's built around herself, and in the process, she begins to rebuild her sense of self-worth, not based on achievements or external validation, but from a place of emotional honesty and acceptance. Meanwhile, Emma struggles with her own emotional turmoil. The relationship between mother and daughter has always been complex, marked by love, tension, and unspoken grievances. Emma's love for her mother is undeniable, but so too is the fear of being hurt again. Growing up with a mother who was often absent emotionally and physically has left its mark on Emma. She has spent much of her life trying to prove herself, both to her mother and to the world, but she knows that her relationship with Victoria has been strained by years of emotional distance. Emma feels torn between her desire to forgive and heal, and the fear of opening herself up to more disappointment. She wants to be there for her mother, but she is also afraid of being let down again. The tension between Victoria and Emma begins to rise as they both try to navigate their evolving relationship. Victoria, in her quest to heal, starts to recognize the ways in which her emotional walls have hurt her daughter. She begins to see how her obsession with success and her fear of vulnerability have left Emma feeling neglected, uncertain, and unsure of her place in her mother's life. Emma, on the other hand, is struggling with her own sense of identity and self-worth. She loves her mother deeply, but she also resents the distance that has existed between them. She wants her mother's approval, but she also fears that nothing she does will ever be enough to bridge the gap between them. This chapter focuses on the growing emotional complexity of their relationship as both women begin to confront their past wounds. As Victoria works through her therapy sessions, she begins to realize that her true success lies not in her career or external achievements, but in her ability to repair the broken connections in her life. She begins to understand that her professional triumphs cannot replace the emotional intimacy she has longed for with her daughter. The realization is a painful one, but it is also a turning point. Victoria recognizes that she must stop hiding behind her success and start investing in the relationships that truly matter, the ones with the people who love her, especially Emma. For Emma, this period of tension and emotional struggle becomes a catalyst for growth. She begins to see her mother not as the perfect, untouchable figure she once idolized, but as a human being with her own vulnerabilities and scars. Slowly, she starts to let go of the resentment she's held for so long, and she opens herself up to the possibility of healing. But it is not easy. The wounds of the past are deep, and the process of rebuilding trust takes time. Emma is unsure of how to approach her mother, afraid of being hurt once again, but she also knows that her own healing is tied to the healing of their relationship. In therapy, Victoria learns the value of emotional openness, something she has spent most of her life avoiding. She begins to understand that healing isn't just about fixing the wounds of the past, it's about learning to be vulnerable, to share her fears and hopes with those she loves. She begins to see that true connection is not about perfection, but about being seen and accepted for who she truly is, flaws and all. The journey is long and filled with setbacks, but for the first time in a long while, Victoria is willing to try. She is willing to face her fears, to open herself up, and to rebuild the connections that have been fractured over the years. As the external pressures from the business world continue to build, Victoria faces a critical choice. She can continue to chase success and external validation, or she can shift her focus toward healing the relationships that matter most. Slowly, she begins to see that her true success lies in the emotional work she's doing, healing herself, healing her relationship with Emma, and learning to trust others. In this quiet, introspective chapter, Victoria learns the importance of emotional openness, and how it is the key to both her personal growth and the restoration of the broken bonds in her life. Victoria stood by the large window of her office, the skyline before her reflecting the early evening light. She could see the world from up here, distant and grand, but it felt so small in comparison to the weight pressing on her chest. For so long, she had been consumed by the relentless pursuit of success, by the need to prove her worth in a world that demanded more and more from her. She had built an empire, but somewhere along the way, the things that mattered most to her had begun to slip through her fingers, particularly her relationship with Emma. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, her eyes filled with unspoken hurt and frustration. Victoria had always thought that providing for Emma, giving her the best education, the finest clothes, and the most extravagant experiences would be enough. She had thought that success in her career would translate into a successful family life. But now, looking at the emptiness between them, Victoria realized how deeply she had failed. She had been so focused on controlling everything around her, from her business to her life, that she had neglected the one thing that truly needed her attention, her daughter. The long hours, the constant phone calls, the endless meetings, none of it had brought her any closer to Emma. In fact, it had pushed them further apart. The realization hit her like a wave, overwhelming and undeniable. She couldn't fix everything all at once. She couldn't erase the years of distance, of mistakes, of broken promises. But she could start with small, meaningful actions. Victoria's thoughts turned to Emma, what she needed most, what would make her feel seen, loved, and understood. It wasn't grand gestures or flashy displays of wealth. It was the time and attention Victoria had denied her for so long. Her daughter needed to know that she mattered more than the business, more than the numbers and the deals. She needed to know that, despite everything, Victoria loved her. That's when it came to her, the trip. A quiet retreat, far from the noise of the city, away from the pressures of her business and the distractions of their daily lives. It would be just the two of them, no interruptions, no meetings, no obligations. It was a chance to step away from everything and reconnect. To give Emma the gift of her undivided attention, to show her that she was worth more than the business empire Victoria had spent so many years building. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about healing and rebuilding, one step at a time. The idea took root quickly, and Victoria began to plan. She wanted the trip to be something Emma would never forget, something that would allow them to rediscover the bond they had lost. It would be simple, no luxurious hotels or extravagant activities. They would go to a small retreat in the mountains, a place that offered peace and solitude, where they could talk, reflect, and be present with each other. It wasn't about escaping reality, but about creating a space where they could face it together, without the weight of the world bearing down on them. As the days passed, Victoria found herself taking a hard look at her own behavior. She had spent so much of her life fighting for control, trying to manage every aspect of her world, that she had forgotten the most important lesson: sometimes, the best thing you can do is let go. She couldn't control Emma's feelings, nor could she undo the hurt she had caused. But she could apologize. She could take accountability for her mistakes, for the times she had chosen the business over her daughter, for the times she had let work come before family. It wasn't easy for Victoria. Admitting her failures, acknowledging her role in the fractured relationship, was one of the hardest things she had ever done. But she knew it was necessary. If she was going to rebuild their relationship, she needed to start by being honest with Emma and with herself. She needed to show her daughter that she was willing to fight for their relationship, to make things right, no matter how long it took. The more Victoria thought about it, the more she realized how much she had been putting her business first, even when it was no longer necessary. Her company was thriving, the team was strong, and her employees were more than capable of leading the way without her constant oversight. It was time to step back, to give them the space they needed to grow, and to trust that the business would flourish even without her direct involvement. She had worked hard to build a foundation strong enough to stand on its own, and it was time to let go of the reins. In doing so, Victoria hoped to create the space for her family to grow, too. The trip with Emma was just the beginning of her plan. She needed to show Emma that her priorities had shifted, that she was willing to make sacrifices in order to be a better mother. It wasn't about the trip itself, but about the message it sent that Victoria was willing to invest in their relationship, that she was committed to making up for the time lost and the mistakes made. The anticipation for the trip began to build within Victoria, not just because of the healing she hoped it would bring, but because it marked a turning point in her life. For the first time in years, she wasn't consumed by the drive to stay on top of her empire. Her role as a business mogul had defined her for so long, but now, she saw herself as a mother first. She knew that success in the world of business meant little if it came at the cost of the relationships that mattered most to her. And no matter how successful she was in her career, she would never truly feel fulfilled until she repaired the bond with her daughter. In the quiet moments leading up to the trip, Victoria felt a profound sense of peace begin to settle over her. She had made the decision to change, to fight for her family, and to show Emma that she was more important than the business. The trip would be a chance to start anew, to begin the process of reconnecting with the daughter she had once taken for granted. It wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of tension, of awkwardness, and maybe even anger. But Victoria was ready. She was ready to face the emotional breakthrough that was about to unfold, to embrace the love she had neglected for so long, and to fight for the relationship that had always been worth the effort. The trip was just the beginning. But for Victoria, it marked the start of a new chapter in her life, one where her family, her love for Emma, and her role as a mother would always come first. It was a plan that would take time, patience, and vulnerability, but Victoria was ready to do whatever it took to rebuild what she had nearly lost. The retreat had been meant to provide a sense of peace, a break from the chaos that had enveloped Victoria and Emma's lives for so long. Yet, as they sat in the quiet room of the secluded cabin, surrounded by the stillness of the forest outside, both of them felt far from at ease. The hum of tension that had been building between them for years seemed to fill the space between their words, making each sentence heavier than the last. Victoria, the ever-composed woman, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, avoiding Emma's gaze. It was as if, in the silence, she was trying to gather the strength to speak, to confront something that had been buried deep inside her for so long. Emma, on the other hand, sat with her legs crossed, her body language closed off, her arms wrapped around herself like a shield. The pain and frustration of years of neglect were visible in the tightness of her posture, in the sadness that lingered in her eyes. It had taken a long time for Emma to even agree to come on this retreat. The years of feeling unheard and unseen had left her with a deep sense of resentment, one that had been festering quietly, growing into an unspoken rift between mother and daughter. Victoria had been driven by ambition, by the desire to prove herself to the world, and in the process, she had overlooked the emotional needs of the one person who had mattered most to her, her daughter. For the first time in what felt like forever, they sat in the same space, separated by more than just physical distance. But now, in the stillness of the retreat, something shifted. A sense of vulnerability hung in the air, and it became clear that the only way forward was to break down the walls that had kept them apart for so long. Victoria cleared her throat, her voice tight with emotion. "I've been so focused on everything else," she began, her words stumbling as if they had never been spoken aloud before. "I thought that if I could be successful, if I could build something real, that it would make everything okay. I thought if I could provide for you, make sure you had everything you needed, I could make up for the other things. But I didn't realize how much I was neglecting. I didn't realize what I was really missing." Emma's eyes softened just slightly, but she didn't say anything. She wanted to listen, but the hurt was still there, thick in her chest. She had heard these kinds of apologies before, but they never felt real. They were always too late, always empty words after too many years of feeling alone. Still, she couldn't stop herself from hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Victoria's eyes welled up with tears, and she wiped them away quickly, almost as if ashamed to be so vulnerable. "I'm afraid. I'm afraid of failing you. Of failing as a mother." Her voice broke as she spoke the words she had been holding inside for so long. "I've been so obsessed with success, with being good enough for the world, that I forgot about being good enough for you. And now, I'm terrified that I've lost you. That it's too late for us." For the first time, Victoria's armor seemed to crack, her tough exterior peeling away to reveal the woman behind the ambition, the woman who was scared and unsure, just like anyone else. The realization hit Emma with such force that it took her a moment to process. This wasn't the mother who had ignored her, the mother who had been too wrapped up in her career to notice her needs. This was a woman who was struggling, who had her own insecurities and fears. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had been holding on to so much anger, so much resentment, but hearing her mother's confession stirred something deep inside her. For the first time, she felt like her mother was truly seeing her. Not as a child she had to manage, not as a responsibility, but as a person with her own emotions, her own pain. "I've missed you," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I missed your love. I missed you being there for me, not just physically, but emotionally. I know you were busy, but I needed you. I needed you to see me, to listen to me, to care." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her voice wavered as she spoke the words that had been buried under layers of hurt for so long. Victoria's heart clenched at the rawness of Emma's words. She had always prided herself on being a provider, on ensuring Emma had everything she needed materially, but she had never realized how much her daughter longed for her emotional presence. She had failed to see the little moments, the quiet pleas for attention, the longing glances when Emma tried to share her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. Victoria had been so caught up in her own world that she had missed them all. "I didn't know," Victoria said, her voice filled with regret. "I didn't know you needed me that way. I thought I was doing enough by giving you everything I could. But I see now. I see now that it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with all the years of unspoken words and unmet needs. But in that silence, something shifted. Emma reached out slowly, her hand trembling, and placed it gently on her mother's. The touch was tentative at first, but as their hands clasped together, a sense of warmth began to spread between them, a warmth that was both familiar and new. "I'm angry," Emma admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm angry because you weren't there when I needed you most. But I want to forgive you. I do." Her words were a mixture of pain and hope, a small yet significant step forward. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'll spend every day trying to earn it. I'll be here for you. Not just as your mother, but as your friend. If you'll let me." The weight of those words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt something shift inside her. It wasn't immediate, the hurt couldn't just be erased, but she could see the sincerity in her mother's eyes. She could feel the love in the way her mother held her hand, in the way she was finally, truly, present. "I don't know if I can fully forgive you yet," Emma said quietly, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to rebuild with you. Slowly. But we have to start somewhere." Victoria squeezed her hand tightly. "Thank you. I'll be patient. I'll wait as long as it takes." In that moment, they both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still a long way to go before all the wounds were healed, but they had made the first step. The walls between them, once impenetrable, had begun to crumble. Trust, though fragile, had been restored. They had truly seen each other for the first time in years. And in that vulnerable exchange, they had found the first glimmer of hope that love, connection, and understanding were still possible between them. Victoria stood at the threshold of a new chapter, having transformed her life in ways she had never thought possible. The once rigid and determined woman who had built an empire on ambition and success was now someone entirely different. Her world, which had been dominated by power, work, and status, had gradually shifted. The foundation of her life had been rebuilt around love, connection, and vulnerability, qualities she had long kept at arm's length. The journey had been long, filled with self-discovery, mistakes, and heartache, but it had led her to a place where she could finally embrace what truly mattered. The relationship between Victoria and Emma, which had once been fraught with tension and distance, had mended and flourished. In the past, Victoria had been so consumed by her business empire that she had neglected the most important relationship in her life, her connection with her daughter. Her drive for success had come at a cost, and Emma had borne the brunt of that cost. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, Victoria had recognized that no amount of money or power could ever replace the bond she shared with Emma. Their relationship was the cornerstone of her life, and she had spent years trying to fix the cracks she had inadvertently created. The turning point had been gradual. Victoria had come to understand that her business would continue to thrive without her constant, obsessive oversight. The empire she had spent decades building had become a well-oiled machine, one that no longer needed her at the helm every moment of the day. This realization allowed her to step back and reassess her priorities. She had once thought that work was everything, that her success was the only way she could prove her worth. But now, she understood that true success wasn't found in boardrooms or bank statements. It was found in the moments of connection, those intimate, fleeting moments that passed unnoticed when she was too focused on the wrong things. Victoria's decision to prioritize Emma above everything else was a defining moment in her personal growth. She no longer viewed her daughter as someone to be managed or kept at a distance, but as an equal, a partner in the journey of life. Their bond, once fragile and strained, was now the bedrock of Victoria's emotional world. They spent time together in ways they had never done before, cooking meals, taking walks, having deep conversations about life, love, and everything in between. In these moments, Victoria allowed herself to be vulnerable in a way she had never done before. She no longer feared losing Emma, she had learned to trust that love, when given freely and without conditions, could withstand any challenge. This vulnerability was new for Victoria. Throughout her life, she had believed that vulnerability equaled weakness, that exposing her true emotions was something to be feared. But over time, she learned that vulnerability was not only a strength, it was a gateway to deeper connection and understanding. She had spent years keeping people at arm's length, afraid of being hurt, afraid of losing control. But with Emma, she found the courage to let go of that fear and allow herself to experience love without reservation. For the first time, she allowed herself to love fully, without the constant worry of what she might lose. In this emotional openness, Victoria began to heal the scars from her past. She could no longer ignore the damage she had caused in her relentless pursuit of success. There had been moments where her ambition had clouded her judgment, where her drive had turned into a tunnel vision that left little room for anything else. The consequences of that approach were evident in her strained relationship with Emma, in the years of missed moments, and in the emotional walls she had built around herself. But now, with her focus on healing and rebuilding, she could see that there was a path forward, one that did not require sacrificing her emotional well-being for the sake of her career. Victoria's business continued to flourish, but it was no longer the center of her universe. The empire that had once consumed her thoughts and energy was now something she managed with a lighter touch. She no longer saw it as an endless race for more. Instead, she viewed it as a tool, something that could support the life she was building with Emma. Business was no longer about proving herself to the world, it was about creating a legacy that allowed her to live the kind of life she wanted, one where her relationships were the most important thing. Emma, too, had grown emotionally. She had spent years feeling neglected, unloved, and unseen. But now, she had witnessed her mother's transformation firsthand. She saw the vulnerability that Victoria had once hidden, and with it came a new kind of understanding between them. Emma had always longed for her mother's attention, but now she saw a mother who was fully present, who was willing to listen, to share, and to give of herself without holding back. This shift allowed Emma to open up in ways she never had before. She no longer felt like she was competing for her mother's love, instead, she felt secure in the bond they had, knowing it was unbreakable. Their relationship, once fractured, was now stronger than ever. They were no longer just mother and daughter, they were partners, friends, and co-creators of a life filled with love and mutual respect. Emma no longer felt the need to hide her feelings or pretend to be someone she wasn't. She could be herself, fully and unapologetically, knowing that her mother would accept her with open arms. As the story drew to a close, Victoria and Emma walked hand in hand, their fingers intertwined in a symbolic gesture of their renewed relationship. The act of walking side by side, in harmony and unity, represented everything they had overcome and everything they were still building together. It was a quiet moment, but one that spoke volumes about their journey, how far they had come and how much further they would go, together. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Victoria was not afraid. She had learned that true success was not found in external achievements or material wealth. It was found in the love that she shared with her family, in the connections that grounded her, and in the vulnerability that allowed her to experience life more fully. With Emma by her side, Victoria knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had found the courage to heal the broken bonds of the past and to embrace the future with hope, love, and an open heart. The story ended on a hopeful note, a reflection of the personal growth that had shaped both Victoria and Emma into stronger, more complete individuals. In the end, Victoria understood that the real measure of success was not what one achieved, but who one loved, how deeply one connected, and the courage one had to heal and grow. It was in the relationships that mattered most, the bonds that could withstand the toughest of times, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability as a path to true fulfillment.